Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 287, Israel Adesanya brutally KO'd Alex Pereira to reclaim his middleweight title. And going into the fight, Israel Adesanya basically got zero respect from MMA fans. Most people were counting him out. Most people were saying he's going to get KO'd again, and he's never going to fight for a middleweight title. And now he pulled off a historic win against Alex Pereira, just brutally KOing him in the second round to reclaim his title. It was a historic moment in MMA, a historic moment in the UFC, and a historic moment for the middleweight division. And it really got me thinking, Israel Adesanya really does not get the respect that he deserves from MMA fans. And in my opinion, he is one of the greatest of all time in the sport, period. And there is an argument to be made that he could be the middleweight GOAT, surpassing Anderson Silva. So in this video, we're going to discuss the GOAT conversation in relation to Israel Adesanya, comparing his resume to Anderson Silva, who is the consensus middleweight GOAT, or was the consensus middleweight GOAT. And we're also going to discuss why Israel Adesanya doesn't get the respect he deserves. And we are going to discuss something. It's a bit of an elephant in the room regarding Israel Adesanya. And nobody will talk about it. Nobody will mention it. You won't find a single video on the internet discussing it because everybody is afraid to say it out loud. Well, guess what? When I started this channel, I made videos that I don't care if people get upset. And we're going to talk about it in this video. And if you get upset with it, oh well, unsubscribe to the channel. So first off, Israel Adesanya defeats Alex Pereira to regain his middleweight title at UFC 287. And what a historic performance. To go out there against a guy that on paper he's lost to 3 times, twice by KO or TKO. And to go out there and put on a statement performance against Pereira, putting him to sleep out cold in the second round after winning the first round unanimously on the judges' scorecards. This was a legendary moment in the UFC, and it was a legendary moment in Israel Adesanya's career. And it really got me thinking, who's Israel Adesanya fighting next? Because he's cleaned out the division. He's fought pretty much everyone in the middleweight division that you would consider a contender. And I know a lot of people are talking about the trilogy fight between him and Alex Pereira, and I might make a separate video on that. But Israel Adesanya, because of his resume, I believe that he is one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time. And nobody really ever says that. You never hear Israel Adesanya's name up there mentioned with George St. Pierre or Jon Jones or Anderson Silva or Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson or whoever else you can think of. He's not really mentioned there. Khabib Nurmagomedov. I believe Israel Adesanya, as it stands right now, if he never fights again, I think he's in the top 5, top 6 of greatest UFC fighters of all time. I mean, his resume is legendary. He's fought the who's who of the middleweight division. He defeated Alex Pereira. He defeated Jared Cannonier. He defeated Robert Whittaker twice. Robert Whittaker is arguably on that list of one of the greatest middleweights of all time. He defeated Marvin Vettori, top-ranked guy. Defeated Paulo Costa, top-ranked guy. Defeated Yoel Romero, in my opinion, the greatest middleweight to never win a title. Defeated Kelvin Gastelum back when Kelvin Gastelum was really good. Defeated Anderson Silva. That doesn't really mean a whole lot. Anderson Silva was out of his prime at the time. So I really don't consider that fight in the conversation of Anderson Silva, versus Israel Adesanya, GOAT middleweight conversation. Beat up Derek Brunson. Beat up Brad Tavares. Marvin Vettori again. And Rob Wilkinson, who is in the PFL right now, doing very well. Has not lost since his loss to Israel Adesanya. That was his UFC debut. He's been in the UFC since 2018, 5 years. He's been the champion. He's defended his belt plenty of times. He lost his belt, regained his belt, and I believe he is a clear-cut GOAT in the UFC, period. I don't know where you want to put him on that list. You could put him at number 5. You could put him at number 4. You could put him at number 1. And I'm not here to hash that out. But he is one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time, period, as it stands right now, if he never fought again. But then that leads the conversation of, is he the middleweight GOAT? And this is where I kind of have trouble because it's very hard and it's very subjective. But I think there is an argument to be made that he has surpassed Anderson Silva as the GOAT. I'm not necessarily going to die on that hill, but you look at both their resumes. I mean, Adesanya, we just went through his entire resume. I think he has the stronger resume. And, if you look at the pure numbers, Anderson Silva has 17 UFC wins, 10 title defenses at middleweight, and Adesanya has 13 UFC wins, 6 title defenses. So the numbers are in Anderson Silva's favor, but I think the level of competition for Adesanya has been stiffer, and I really do believe you can make that argument that Adesanya has surpassed him. But at the same time, if it was up to me, if I'm going to, stick to a certain argument and say this is my opinion, I would say right now he's one fight away from surpassing Anderson Silva, depending on who he fights. I just think the level of competition that he's faced, I just think it's better than the level of competition that Anderson Silva faced in his title run. And Adesanya's defended his belt 6 times. And if you started, he's cleaned out the division. If you started feeding him guys like Dricus du Plessis or Sean Strickland or whoever else you can drum up, Andre Muniz or Brendan Allen, who just beat Andre Muniz, Israel Adesanya would rack up title defenses faster than you could count. So it's not really the 10 title defenses. People are already complaining there's no one for him to fight. You got Khamzat Chimaev potentially making his way into the middleweight division. That could be a potential fight coming up. But I do believe if Adesanya gets one more title defense, I think he's right there or surpasses Anderson Silva just based on the quality of resume, because Anderson Silva was in the same situation where he cleared out the division and just started fighting guys that he was clearly going to beat. And I'm not saying he has a padded resume. He has a very good resume as well. You look at Anderson Silva, 2 wins over Chael Sonnen when he was in his prime. And I'll never forget, it's the fight that made me a hardcore MMA fan. Back when he defeated Chael Sonnen at UFC 117, where he lost 4.5 rounds only to pull off a triangle choke. And this was an insane fight. This was an insane win for Anderson Silva. And, you look at his resume, Vitor Belfort, the Forrest Griffin performance was legendary, even though that was at light heavyweight. The Damian Maia fight was horrible, not the greatest. And then you get into like the Stephan Bonner, like that was just to save a pay-per-view main event. They needed somebody to step in. They booked that fight. So you can kind of pick apart anyone's resume, and I do believe that Adesanya, you look at the skill level, I do believe you can make the argument that he's already surpassed it. But the way I look at it right now, it's kind of tied because Anderson has a little bit more in terms of numbers, but Adesanya has fought better talent, in my opinion. And, it's hard for me to say that because people are going to say, you're crazy, Anderson Silva's the GOAT. Anderson Silva is my all-time favorite fighter. So this isn't coming from a place of bias. And that leads me into the topic, why aren't people giving Adesanya the respect that he deserves? Because I don't even ever hear anyone mention him in the GOAT conversation in terms of the middleweight division or just GOAT in the UFC at all. You hear Jon Jones constantly. You hear George St. Pierre constantly, and I'm wondering, why is he not in that GOAT discussion? And I do believe it's because a lot of people don't like Israel Adesanya. And there's a variety of reasons. And we're going to get to the one that nobody ever mentions out loud in a minute. But the first reason is, the first reason I believe he doesn't get the respect he deserves is because people say Israel Adesanya is boring. And the way I refute that is, Adesanya has 24 pro MMA fights, 16 wins by KO. He primarily wins his fights by KO. And if you look at his UFC fights, he has 15 fights in the UFC. He has 3, maybe 4 boring fights. You can go back to the Yoel Romero fight. The Jarrett Cannonier fight wasn't particularly exciting. And then you can really go and say, okay, well, what about the second Marvin Vettori fight? And then you're really starting to split hairs. You're saying maybe Robert Whittaker's second fight. Not every fight is going to be crazy exciting, okay? But people forget, he fought Kelvin Gastelum. That is probably the greatest middleweight title fight of all time. People forget the performance he put on against Robert Whittaker when he won the undisputed title. People forget about the performance he put on against Paulo Costa. People forget about the first fight at UFC 281 against Alex Pereira where he lost, but he was winning the majority of the fight. Super exciting fight. And my question is, people will say, well, that's Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is the reason those fights were exciting. Well, if you want to say, okay, it's Izzy's opponent that dictates whether or not it's exciting or not, and that it's all his opponent's, fault that the fight was exciting, well, then can't you blame the boring performances on his opponent as well? Now, I think both guys, it takes two to fight. I think it's both guys' fault. I've been critical of Adesanya being boring before, but I just believe that is one of the reasons that Adesanya is not as liked and respected and given as much appreciation by the fan base as he probably should. But it's just crazy to me. Of 15 fights, he's had 3 or 4 that were maybe boring. And I say maybe because the only ones that I really found boring was the Yoel Romero fight and maybe the Jarrett Cannonier fight. I mean, it was uneventful. It wasn't the greatest. But that's on both fighters. It's not just his fault. And he's had plenty of exciting fights in the UFC. Another reason that Israel Adesanya isn't given the credit that he deserves is because he says corny lines. Because he's cringy. People don't like, guys who are corny, who are cringy. And for that reason, they're just like, he's not good. He's boring. There's some people still saying, oh, Pereira needs a trilogy fight because right now, Adesanya is 1-3 against him. And, he needs to fight him again because he's scared of him. And that's why he's trying to turn down the fight. And it's just any way possible to delegitimize Israel Adesanya and what he has done in his UFC career. It is, he's scared of this guy. He's scared of that guy. The gyno, the constant mention of the gyno, he's never failed a test, okay? He's never failed a test. Conor McGregor has openly came out and says that he's using PEDs. I'll be cleared for testing by this date. He is using PEDs. Nobody's critical of that, really. You barely hear anyone talking about that. I talk about it. And there's probably some people that do talk about it. But it's just a constant. Adesanya's on PEDs. Adesanya's on PEDs. He's never failed a test. People are diagnosing him of PED use based off Instagram pictures. That's literally what's going on here. And maybe he is. But until we have any hard evidence, I just think you're just delegitimizing this guy's career. Now, another reason, and this is a really touchy topic that a lot of people don't want to touch, and this isn't the main reason I'm getting to at all. We're going to get to an even bigger reason here in a second that nobody wants to talk about. But I do believe there is a portion of the MMA base that racism is the reason that they do not like Israel Adesanya. And I know what the counter argument to this is. And again, I'm not saying to what percentage this exists. I'm just saying that it does exist. And I know the counter argument, and I believe this to be true as well, is that no matter what background you have, whether you're Brazilian, whether you're African American, whether you're white, whatever nationality you want to say, there's always going to be portions of that nationality, of that ethnicity that is racist. But here's the way that I counteract that argument. I believe, and I couldn't find any hard numbers on this other than a study from 2010, 60% of the UFC fan base, according to one study, is white. So even if you want to say that 5% of every race is racist against certain fighters, you still have a higher percentage of people or a higher number of people racist against black fighters, racist against Brazilian fighters, whatever it may be, because the primarily fan demographic is white. Now, I'm not saying that's the biggest reason, and I don't even know how large that is, but it definitely exists. And I know this has been a hot topic for a couple months now. People were talking about it a couple months ago. If it angers you to even admit that that exists, you're probably a racist, to be honest. If to admit that that even exists angers you, you need to go see a psychiatrist at some point. Because again, I'm not saying this is primarily a reason. I'm just saying that it does exist. You see Israel Adesanya, who has performed and achieved everything under the sun in the UFC. And for some reason, people still just hate his guts. And the people that hate him and say he's cringy and corny are the same people that then on the other side say, I love Colby Covington. I love Colby Covington. Israel Adesanya is boring and cringy, but I love Colby Covington. Now, I don't think Colby Covington is boring, but I will say Israel Adesanya is more exciting, okay? And Colby Covington is equally as cringy and corny, and I could come up with countless examples. That's just one of them, and that's just one factor why I believe that fans aren't necessarily so in love with Israel Adesanya. And I've listed the other reasons. But one of the biggest factors And this is the elephant in the room that nobody ever discusses. And I'm going to get a lot of shit for this, for sure, even bringing this up. And that is, and I double checked, triple checked. I'm like, am I crazy even thinking this? And I asked 5 random people who I know are MMA fans, hardcore fans, casual fans. I got the same answer. And I did not lead them on with this question, but that is, there is a subset of UFC fans that believe Israel Adesanya is a homosexual and does not like him because of that. I don't know what Israel Adesanya's sexuality is. I don't care what his sexuality is. But there is people that are constantly talking about what color his nails are, what color his hair is, what kind of clothes he's wearing. They're calling him the gender bender. They're calling him, whatever type of homophobic slurs they can throw out to insult him. And the fan base does this. Go look at the comment sections. I have a small MMA YouTube channel. I see this stuff in my live chat all the time. Now, for me personally, I don't know what percentage hate him because of this. I'm just admitting that it exists. And nobody wants to say that. Nobody will ever mention that. You won't find an article about it. You won't find a video about it. There is people that believe Adesanya is gay, and they hate him because of it. They hate the way he acts. They hate the way he dresses. They hate the way, he might dye his hair pink or paint his nails. For me, none of that matters. Can you fight or can you not fight? But there are some people that are obsessed with other men's sexuality just because they are a UFC fighter. Case in point, Jeff Molina. Now, I didn't make a video about this, but if you don't know, Jeff Molina is a UFC fighter who it has recently come out that apparently he's bisexual. There was a video of him performing a sexual act on video that proved this point. And there was people out there constantly talking about it. There was people making breakdown videos, watching the Jeff Molina video and talking about it and talking about what happened. My thought behind this is, if you are a grown man and you are breaking down a video of another grown man who just happens to be a UFC fighter performing a sexual act, I think you need to see a psychiatrist. And there's some people that were rejoicing in this, enjoying this. Like, oh yeah, Jeff Molina got exposed. They never cared when he fought. He's a prelim fighter. They never cared when he fought. But they're like, oh yeah, he's bisexual or whatever, he may be. They are bringing it up and using it as ammo to hate him. Constant jokes on him. And, he may be okay with some of those jokes. He may not be. I'm just saying that is an example of what goes on in the sport. And I just think it's one of those things where there will be people out there that won't have the guts to mention this stuff. They'll be too scared to mention this. But I asked 5 different people. I said, this was the way I phrased the question. I said, there is an unspoken reason that a lot of MMA fans hate Israel Adesanya. Do you know what that is? This is not a trick question. And the majority of all 5 of those, I'm not exactly quoting every single one of them, but it says, because they think he's gay. I never led the question on. And you guys know it to be true as well. If you're watching this video, you know people legitimately dislike Israel Adesanya because they think he's gay. They think about another grown man's sexuality. To me, it doesn't matter. I don't care what he is. I enjoy watching him fight. And I think those are the reasons that Israel Adesanya doesn't get the respect he deserves from the MMA community. Now, to what percentage each of those are, I mean, the boring fights, which honestly is a fake narrative in my opinion, the cringy lines, the racism, the homosexuality, narrative in general, what percentages each one of those account for the hate and dislike for Israel Adesanya, I don't know. And I'm not saying just because you dislike Israel Adesanya, I'm not saying you're a racist, I'm not saying you're a homophobe, but I'm just admitting that those people exist. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I believe Israel Adesanya is one of the greatest of all time, and I believe he is getting nowhere near the amount of respect he deserves for his resume within the UFC. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.